don't have to, but oh, okay. I guess we will. Cool. Yeah. So, we've done two of these so far, and the first two are really focusing on starting at the bottom of the pyramid and working your way up. Big picture of putting your team together. What it is that passive real estate investing is. How does it differ from owning property versus being in a syndication, which is typically what these are called, or how to raise funds through private means and doing it within compliance. But to take a step back and just understanding how to do it, how to be involved with it. A lot of people are nervous or scared because they don't know a lot about it, and that's fine. But I think like Kay, what you're doing is great, building your experience, because eventually, if you really like this and you want to do it, you'll want to do it, and you'll talk to yourself about doing it. So that's really important. And I truly believe that this is the next wave of wealth growth in our country. And I think that it would also indicate how people can diversify more and still be involved, but not get involved in a lot of the risk. We've always talked about the two sides where you could have a lot of risk on the active side, but you've got full ownership, and on the passive side, not a lot of risk, but you don't have a lot of control of property. So that's always kind of the catch-22 between the two. So it's just what you're comfortable with. And it's also, passive real estate investing is also a good way to start, even if you want to eventually one day become a developer, or you want to become someone that's active, because it's great to learn and how to see those projects kind of on the passive side, to see how pitch decks are put together, how things are put together, so that you understand what you need to do as a developer on all aspects of a deal. So it's a nice way to kind of progress to be active. Do you guys want me to put the slides up? I'm happy to. If not, we could just kind of have a
John,
conversation.
I kind of actually think it'd be great to keep it going, just to have it consistent throughout the series.
Sure.
And then we'll maybe have more discussion over it.
Yeah, we could. Like we said, we're recording, so go ahead and put the slides up, and that way everybody can kind of follow along, and we can also post this for folks that aren't able to make it here on the webinar live. So yeah, today we're gonna. Oh, I have real estate sponsors. That's wrong. We're gonna talk about properties today, and locations. Actually, locations. So we're gonna talk about the different locations we're gonna find, that we're gonna look to in order to decide, what makes the most sense when you're investing. So again, the first part was putting your team together. The first person on your team is you. You're going to start with that, and then put those folks around you. It's just our disclaimer, just making sure everybody knows that we've done this for a while, but there are experts that you can talk to as far as on the legal side stuff. But at the end of the day, this is just more of information sharing. Do your homework, trust but verify. You guys know Doug, Dave, and I. If not, this gives you a little background on us and our experience and what we've done, and how we kind of put our mindsets together to kind of be able to speak on these topics. We've been doing this for all the three. What's the purpose? We want to provide education and experience, help folks as they continue to take the plunge into passive real estate investing. What's the benefits? And again, so you can watch the preceding webinar parts, part one specifically, when we went through this. But if you guys have any questions on any of these, just let us know, and we'll kind of come back and revisit. But the meat and potatoes of this is really the 7 parts, and we've got through the first 2, which we talked about, putting your team together. Who are the folks you need to have in your team to give you the confidence that you can go and do this? And then the second part was looking at sponsors, people that have properties and are bringing forward opportunities for you to potentially invest. What are some of the things you need to do in order to evaluate a good sponsor? I've got a checklist I go through that is pretty detailed, that starts kind of very broad, and then it goes down to really specifics. So, that's kind of like you're interviewing that company to decide if they're a good company you want to work with. And they shouldn't be afraid to share everything with you. Again, we talked about in that second part that if they're not, or they're not willing, then there's definitely a red flag there, depending on what you're asking for. So just got to take that into consideration. But today we're going to focus on the location. Location is probably just as important as the sponsor. Of course, you don't want an inexperienced sponsor and a wonderful location, because the sponsor is going to be the one that drives the process and the project. But if you got a good solid sponsor, you want to next make sure you're in a good location. That's not to say an up-and-coming location is a bad investment. I kind of take the side where I don't want to be the new kid on the block and breaking my teeth into a new market with a new asset class, because you got nothing to really compare. Robert Kiyosaki says that if you're doing good in investing and making money, it's kind of boring. And that's kind of the truth. It's exciting to make money, but if the process is boring and you're making money, that's a good thing. So when you look at locations, it's really a matter of what you're comfortable with. A lot of people like to invest close to home, where they live, where they can get in their car and within an hour drive to wherever they need to go to see these properties they're going to invest in. My first property was around the corner from where I lived in Southern Maryland. I was building a new home. It was right around the corner from where I lived. So I was there every day. I got to talk to the builder. So other people are not as concerned. They'd rather be in a better area. They'd rather, maybe the area they live in is not the greatest as far as investing in real estate. And again, I'm not biased to any place, but like, for instance, I'm not a big fan of investing in New York. I'm from New York. I could speak bad about New York all I want. So at the end of the day, I just don't like New York because the cost of living is high. The taxes are high. It's not a state that's economically friendly from where I sit and what I do. So if I lived in New York, I wouldn't invest in New York. I'd probably invest in the markets that I'm currently in, just because what I'll talk about and when we go through is what I focus on. So it's just a matter of what you're comfortable with and what you see as opportunity for your, profile and your risk tolerance. The first thing we're going to talk about with location is population. You want to see a location where the market has got a nice, strong population growth. It could be a low number, but showing, nice progression and increases each year, 8 to 10% or 5% if it's a bigger city or bigger area. But you want to see that trend ticking up, because the more the population, the more people that are coming, the more there's a need for housing. So definitely something to look at. And I would say probably one of the most important things to start off is where's the population? Is it growing? Is it coming down? Why is it coming down? Why is it going up? Which is we'll get into the next portion here. And you guys feel free to stop me if you have any questions or you want to elaborate on any of this stuff too. The next part after population is what's the demographics of that population. So obviously, you want a working class demographic that's going to be able to have a pretty nice salary that could take care of like paying their rent or their mortgage payments. A demographic that's got strong economics. It's got a nice diversified percentage of folks there that are more working than not, obviously, low unemployment, nice salary or nice income, median income. So demographics are important when it comes to what's the dollar amount that larger percentage of that demographics making or earning. What are kind of the jobs there, which we'll get to in a second, but are they high collar, white collar jobs, or is it a mix of blue and white collar jobs? And that's going to obviously be important, because if you have people there that are not working, then they're not going to pay their bills and they're not going to pay their rent. And that's how you make your income. So that's how you make your profits in these projects. Along with demographics, population obviously is the employment. I always like to see that the markets I'm investing in are below the national average, which is great, because that means obviously there's hopefully a thriving employment area there. There's, one example I would say is like we love Charleston, South Carolina, because we've got arguably one of the largest ports in the country. We've got a new lithium battery factory and industry factory. It's being built down there, $3 billion factory. So what is that going to do? That's going to bring jobs to those areas. Atlanta, Georgia, there's so many companies that are moving headquarters down there. Norfolk Suffolk's down there. You've got Porsche down there. You've got all these businesses that are moving into Atlanta, moving into Charleston. So look to see where the employment is and take a look and see how that relates to the demographic and the population growth. Because the lower the unemployment, the more jobs that are there, the more of an opportunity to see some great housing opportunities and needs. Yeah, employment and income kind of are the same thing, and income really means, taxes as well. So like, what is the tax rates for the states? Is there county tax, personal property tax, state tax? How do they treat taxes? Florida has no state income tax. So does Texas, and there's a few others, but they have a very, very high property tax. They have a very high insurance for hurricanes. And so you may say, oh, there's no state taxes there, but there's other ways that if you own property, or if you have a need for, if you want to buy property on waterfront, you're going to be paying higher in insurance and in taxes. So income's important. What people are making and taking home is going to be what they use to pay their bills and in turn for their housing. Crime's obviously a big one. There's different types of crime. Obviously, there's white collar crime. There's heavy crime. But crime is crime. I mean, it doesn't really matter what it is. If you have high crime areas, high percentages, that's obviously a concern. People don't like to live in areas that have high crime. So you just want to keep an eye out for that. You want to make sure that's not a challenge or an issue, especially with families. A lot of times if there's high levels of crime, you're not going to see a lot of families moving into those areas. So definitely something to look at and to make sure you kind of do your analysis on. Schools are another big one, especially for families. Like for instance, if you're, let's say you're going to be looking in Washington, D.C., well, schools may not be a huge thing in Washington, D.C., because the majority of the people that live in D.C. are working age, younger folks that, or folks that don't have kids, or 1 or 2 kids max. So maybe not as much of a big deal. But when you get into the suburban versus the urban areas, again, it tends to be more important that schools are ranked higher, that education is strong, and that the schools don't have any negative reviews, or there's problems there. That's obviously something that's really important that folks, care about. So before I get into the neighborhood stuff, I just want to show you a couple of websites I have that could help when you're looking at this stuff. So one I really like is called Niche, and it's just www.niche.com. And so if you go to Niche, you can type in the city, and it'll give you an overall grade for that area. So you could look at public schools, crime, safety, housing, stuff I talked about. Then you click on this full report card, and it gives you a lot of the other rankings and grades for each area. And then it just kind of gives you a little bit of a background on the area, the population here. And you can go year over year, medium home sale, the type of area, whether it's urban, rural, suburban. And you could go through this on your own. You could look at some things. You look at the map. You can click on some specific areas and counties. Here's some homes that are for sale. You can get an idea of what home prices are. And this is really neat, where it ranks, among other cities inside of Maryland and nationwide. So you could also look at that. Crime and safety, you can look at this. So this is really nice. And if you go here, I'm just scrolling down, but you can actually click on, one of the specifics that'll come down, and you can see. So like, say Oakdale, high and middle are the best schools. And let's say you're looking at an area and those schools aren't on there, maybe it's like, all right, well, let's try to get closer to there if that's something that's interesting when it comes to like schools and education for kids. So that's a nice website. This is another good one I like to use, bestplaces.net. And you can type in on the main page, you type in the city and state, and it'll come up again with some really good demographic information. It'll give you a cost of living on the side here, real estate. You click on cost of living, I'll tell you how it compares nationally, how it compares, city to city or county to county. And then some of the stronger suits of it, according to, Virginia, and then across the country. So it's got 148.2% cost of living, which is really high. But if it's got a high cost of living, it probably means that it's got, solid jobs. So if you go back to overview or you go to jobs, then you pull up the jobs and you can see how it relates to that higher quality of life, higher cost of living. which is cool. It's taking a little while to load, but I'll go to the next one. Here's another nice one, City Data, city-data.com. Another good site you can go to. So I typed in Charleston, South Carolina. You can go by zip code. You can pull up, median income. You can pull up South Carolina, Charleston. So you see Charleston makes almost $13,000 more than the rest of the state. So obviously it's, a little more value for property there than outside of that city. So, and this goes a ways down. So you can look up a ton of information on here to compare the areas. So again, these are just some sites you can use. There's others out there. You can just go on Google and type in a city name and type real estate reviews or real estate reports, and you'll get a lot of these sites. But these are the three I typically like to use that I just wanted to highlight. So we'll go back. Anybody and guys got any questions so far? Anything else that I might be missing? Oh, I did this. Give me 1 sec. Sorry. Here we go. Okay, so then going a little deeper after you kind of look at the first couple there. You want to start looking at the neighborhoods, right? You want to see, is there nice signs up for developments? Does it look like it's a nice posh area, or is it like very rural? There's nothing but cows out there. There's not a lot of activity. What does the neighborhoods look like? Maybe if it is close by, or you want to fly in to take a look at the market, you drive through some of the developments just to see what the homes look like. Are they class A, class B properties, brand new construction, usually class A, and go from there. What's the amenities? Everybody wants restaurants, grocery stores, nightlife. So that's something else. How far is the closest grocery store? Do you have 3 in a 1 mile radius, or do you have 1 in a 10-mile radius? So, and again, you got to decide your segment. You may be in a more rural area that people like having stuff further away, and they don't want their neighbor on top of them. So that's really, going back to these top 6. But yeah, you want to have a nightlife. You want to have good stuff that attracts people to that area. Outlet malls, places where people can come together and socially kind of interact is another big thing. Do you have a few malls nearby? Outlet malls, indoor malls is another big thing. And, that's also a sign that more people are coming to the area, that they're opening up, commercial retail, so that there's a demand there, a need for their products. So if you start seeing that coming up in these areas, or it's there, it's been enduring, that's also another strong sense that market's pretty strong. Corporate stuff, the kind of corporations I usually go on, and if I go to a city, I'll look up, the top 500 businesses in that area. Where do they rank across the nation or across the state? Who's there? There's articles you can look up to see who's coming to that area, how many jobs they're bringing. So that's another big thing, is there's a lot of corporations coming. There's a lot of headquarters for big name companies. That's definitely something to consider and put on your, positive side of the list when you're looking at analyzing some of these properties. If there's a lot of lands and there's a lot of development going on, that's also a good thing, because that just means that there's a need for housing, and that the existing housing is not enough to support the demand for the population. So if you start seeing a lot of things going on with new development, or you start seeing, ground up apartment buildings, that means that developers are getting into that market. Now, again, sometimes you got to make sure you didn't miss the bus, but you definitely take advantage of maybe getting something that's already there, because obviously new development could take 2 to 5 years to finish and have completely in place for new residents. But definitely a plus if you see that, and dig into that some more if you can find articles. Standard macroeconomics, if you're a business major like me, high demand, low supply, high supply, low demand. It just, depends on what's out there. If there's a lot of properties that are available, could also be a good way to get something really cheap. So maybe getting some 30, 40 cents on the dollar. Like I live here in Fairfax County, Virginia, and I haven't seen a house on the market in probably 3 months in my immediate neighborhood. And anything that is coming on the market doesn't even get time to get a sign up. That's how quickly it's going. So we've got a huge demand challenge and a very low supply challenge. Again, double a double-edged sword, because you may not be able to get as much, or you may not be able to get those properties you want because they're so overpriced. So you got to do your math, but definitely want to take a look at supply and demand and how that impacts your decision. And again, inventory, same thing. What's in the inventory? A lot of times you can pull up reports from Redfin. You can pull up reports from Zillow just to see if you're doing single family. And then I'll show you some other reports you can pull up for multifamily. Yeah, and then market news. I mean, obviously, if you got the Wall Street Journal, or you got Business Journal, or you got periodicals, magazines that are in the markets you're interested in, definitely something good to pick up and study just to see what the asset classes are, which we'll get to in our next discussion. What are the high asset classes that are selling? What are the hot investment asset classes in these different markets? I like a nice slow progression type hot market, not like a Boise, Idaho over the last 3 years where it was like, hot for like 6 months and now it's totally cooled down. Because I mean, everybody's jumping in and trying to invest in that area. So, and also, with the market news, try to see who those developers and sponsors are in those areas, because usually those are the ones that know the market the best. Those are the ones that can walk, the permitting and the planning and design through the review boards the best. They've gone through the bureaucracy of that state and know how to handle a lot of that. So that's part of your market news when you're looking at that. That's really important as well.
You had a question, Kay?
Yeah, I did. Thank you, Doug. Just to go back to the new development.
Mm-hmm.
So here in Washington State, I don't live too far from Bellevue. In Bellevue, what we've seen is Bellevue and Seattle, we're both seeing entire blocks of homes that are on sale all at the same time. The developer's going in and they're buying up the entire block. It's like an entire city block. They've demolished everything and there's growth. They're putting up these big sky rises now, and they're multifamily with stores and shopping underneath. So it's supposed to be the convenience of a new community. However, there's not as much home in the residentials that are being built. Would that be considered a red flag or a sign of development? Because it seems to be very confusing.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give my 2 cents, and then Doug and Dave and Dan can jump in. I would kind of look at maybe the last 2 to 3 years worth of data to see, has there been a demand for multifamily, more apartment renting, more smaller sized living housing that the folks are targeting? Because obviously if there is, then those developers are trying to meet that demand. Now, there's also been a big rush into the build for rent or build to rent model where home builders are now building homes to rent because it's just getting so expensive that people still want the American dream. They just can't afford it. So they're going to rent the properties so that they can save more and then eventually hopefully have enough to put down to get a mortgage and buy their dream home. So I would just do a little bit of research, because there may be a demand for multifamily, but if they start coming in and flooding the market, that can definitely, capsize the supply demand balance. And especially if their rental prices are not on par with what current rental rates are. So if they're, if the average 2-bedroom is rented for $1,500, just notionally speaking, and they're coming out and projecting in the next 2 years it's going to be $1,900 or $2,100, that's a pretty big jump. So there could be opportunity there that they may create a vacuum or a vacancy grouping that is still going to need housing, but just can't afford what they're putting on the market. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. What I'm actually considering or learning, but considering is there are their ground level. There's going to be some, there's a lot of boutique shops that have been popping up, which I have feelings both ways. What's concerning me is the average rents for 1 bedroom, just one door, 1 bedroom, 1 bath, it seems to be in a neighborhood of $2,500 a month. With these new developments, they're going on the market for $4,700 a month. for a 1-bedroom, 1-bath in the same block, 1 mile radius. They're all within the downtown area. They're all within walking. None of them have garages because everybody's walking everywhere. To me, I'm thinking, okay, that's pushing the rental costs up. But if people are able to afford that, you also see much nicer cars. You don't see cars with dents and, trashed. You don't see trashing neighborhoods. Are all those signs of things that you need to watch for to see if those are areas that you want to invest in, regardless of if it's whether Seattle, Bellevue, or even across the country? Is that something that you really want to see on a regular basis, or is it just something to start in with? I mean, I'm so green on this. I'm trying to learn what would be the triggers besides seeing all these U-Hauls suddenly coming to an area where you can see people are actually moving in, not moving out.
Yeah, Doug or Dan or Dave, go for it.
Yeah, I'll kind of jump in here and just kind of give you my thoughts on that, Kay. I would say really the rent increases and things like that really depend whether or not they're reasonable on the underlying market demand. I'll kind of give you an example. We have a developer partner down in the Columbus, Ohio area. He's been there his whole life, knows the area really well. And in our conversations with him, he's talked about, over the last, 5 or 10 years, we've had 5,000 or 8,000, homes a year that just, we have people coming in, we have nowhere they have nowhere to live. So if you're seeing year over year, you have a housing demand that a certain area of a city just can't meet. Taking a single family home or a duplex or a triplex and turning that into, 7 or 10 or 12 apartments or condos in order to meet a legitimate housing need, then yeah, that could be a really good thing. If the market supports it over the long term, then yeah, absolutely. That's signs, in my opinion, of strong economic growth, supported by underlying housing demand. All good things. You're seeing rents going from, $2,500 a month, up to $4,500, $4,600, $4,700 a month. Is it justified? You mentioned earlier about, people who live in some of these areas that you're seeing, they walk everywhere because there's all these amenities everywhere. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because if, we have another project, 2 of them actually in Charleston, South Carolina, in exactly those types of areas, where everything is convenient to walk. So the people who are potentially moving into those areas, they don't have the expense of a car. They don't have the expense of car insurance. They don't have the expense of registration and all the things, annual maintenance, all that stuff associated with, owning a vehicle. Well, okay, maybe that frees up a little bit of, additional cash that they can put into rent or put into a mortgage on a condo in a place like that. So it really kind of depends on, the area. Does the data support knocking down a single family home and putting up a 5 or 6 condo or 5 or 6 apartment facility over retail? So in places like, areas where we're in Charleston, South Carolina, I would say, yeah, it absolutely does. But, if it's out in the middle of nowhere, or it's just not supported, or, you have plenty of homes and not enough people, then doing something like that, no, it doesn't make sense. And it really kind of goes back to the importance of John's discussion on location. Of have to match the location with the type of asset that you have to make sure that it's going to be a good fit in that location. Going back to things like demographics, you don't want to necessarily develop an assisted living facility where the average age of your population is 35. They're too young to move into it. Their parents are too young to move into it. Or you don't want to develop a self-storage facility in an area where you don't have a lot of people transitioning in and out. You really have to match the type of asset with the location that you're in, and make sure that the housing data and the market data supports that type, if that helps.
Yeah, that's helpful, because once you brought up the point about the assisted living, I've been actually seeing some hotels that went under during COVID that are now being converted to assisted living apartments, which is kind of a cool thing. But some of the locations, I have to scratch at my head. It's like, why? Because they're so far away from medical facilities and shopping for the seniors, and the accessibility, because some of them cannot drive and they don't have public transportation. They don't have adequate even an Uber in the area. It's so remote. So I'm just kind of scratching my head. Why? So is that the right or the wrong way to look at something?
I think it's
Yeah.
both. I mean, if there's no senior assisted living at all, and these guys are breaking the mold to bring it in, and there's the demand that you have nationwide, the baby boomers are now, in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. So if you've got a high baby boom demographic in that market, and there's nothing that's there at all, then that's a demand, that's a need, right? Until somebody gets closer to the medical facilities or downtown, wherever, that's the only game in town. So that definitely would, I think, raise the bar. That's just kind of looking at it macro. You got to dig in and see what the costs are. What are they going to charge? My mom and my dad were both in senior living, so I kind of have an idea how that works. But going back to Dave's point, it's really a matter of risk versus return. If you tell me that the rent's going to go up from 2,500 to 4,700, and it's only going to take these guys, let's say, 2 years to have these properties finished on the market, fully stabilized from where they see it, you're talking about almost a 50% rise in the rents over the next 2 years, 45, 50% year over year. And that's, that we didn't even have that during the height of COVID when multifamily was, skyrocketing. So there's definitely, I would not want to, again, that's the new kid on the block, right? They're going to be breaking the barrier. They're going to be the ones to try to do that. I don't know if I'd want to invest with a group like that. The other thing is I would look to see what's new in that area that's similar of that style, what's been built, what's the new construction over the last 12 to 18 months. What are they getting for rent? That's the Class A product right now on the market. We always underwrite to what's on the market. We don't typically underwrite for the future. Now, if it's a 3% increase, which is typical, right? Year over year, we usually see 3% increase in rent rates, 5% vacancy, then that's something we're willing to look at. But we're always going to want to underwrite to now, not what's then. And again, if these guys want to go ahead and shoot for that 4,700 a month, good luck to them, because I think the chances of that are a lot lower of getting that than the chances of them being higher of them getting that. So it's just too much risk there.
Dan, you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to carry on from what Kay asked, and I'm just making sure that we're going from, the received wisdom that is common in these different circles, which is it comes down to choosing class. And I just want to throw in a little extra, because it's one of Douglas's main things is focusing on the macro. And the main pong that I ever hear about that is, how do you make money off of macro? And this is the answer. The answer is if you are watching macro and you think that, we're going to have tough times ahead, then you do not want to be in A-class properties. Because the people who could afford A-class properties, if they're in trouble, they're going to downgrade to a B. And of course, it's not like everybody in the entire economy is going to move in the same direction. So you're going to still have some people moving up because, they're part of some company that's got great growth or whatever. But, that's a lot of the reason why a lot of people like the B classes is because, like you've got that buffer, people who downgrade from A will still go to the Bs, and, people who, are fine where they are, they'll stay in the Bs, but that's really the main thing. And it's really tough to time it. But that's really the play that I think you have to look out for, is just why would you be investing at the top of the top stuff? I think a lot of it has to do with people's egos. They want to have the big skyscraper with their name on it and whatnot. The really shiny places. Oh, I'm the big shot because I got this really super nice place instead of this place where it's not.
Yeah, and I want to dovetail off what Dan is saying there too. Is really important in terms of an LP and what you're trying to decide. Your returns for accepting tertiary should be higher, right? You should expect a higher return because you're further away from the sticks, and you're accepting more risk. And that's one thing that I think is important when you're selecting an investment. Also, back to your main point, Kay, about this particular location, the zoning aspect is really huge too. Zoning is a challenging thing, especially on the West Coast for developers. And so you might see weirdness where you have a skyscraper next to residential subdivisions like that, because we have a really there's no other way to put it. We have a broken zoning system in the American, there's no missing middle is what we talk about a lot in the development space. So you basically going from a 6 or 7 story sky rise to, single and 2-story single family homes, whereas there should be something, you got the main arterial street, the sky rise right next to it. And then the street over, you have some, mixed, like 3 or 4 story housing as well. And that's one of the main problems that we have in America with our zoning. So back to that concern about, well, is that weird? No, because our zoning is broken. And I just wanted to address that particular issue.
Thank you. Yes, it's helpful. I didn't mean to interrupt your webinar here.
No, it's good stuff. Good stuff.
Something.
Well, we're
I'm
hoping-
No,
just
very
really-
good.
I'm sorry.
Very good stuff. No interruption. No apology necessary. This is good stuff to talk about.
Yeah, it's confusing because we are, every place that we visit, we're noticing very different class of properties and what people are valuing, and some are just like really into the shiny object syndrome, and some are just up to this like got to have this ego stroke, and others are like, it's just a good hometown community, and I'm looking for my future retirement and where I want to live, because where I live right now, it's not conducive for long term. It's not conducive for anything for richness of life, of quality of life. It's just where we happen to be because of employment right now, for my husband's job. So once we're able to relocate, we're kind of looking ahead and seeing where we want to be and move ourselves into that position. But it's hard to make a decision, because once you go into that, you want to make sure that you're able to continue growing too. But it's all the nuances are very, very different. It's exciting, but the new development really kind of peaks it, because there's so much development going on that you're kind of confused. Does it make sense? Okay, maybe they're saying something that we're not seeing, so I need to ask questions, and maybe I'm missing something altogether that I shouldn't be missing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think another red flag I have seeing something that's at $4,700 compared to 25 is, again, what did they pay for it? Did they overpay for it? Did they acquire it at a higher amount? Are they experiencing higher costs in their budget that now they've got to raise that, targeted underwritten rent rate to that amount to basically cover their costs now that are increasing and are only going to go up, plus pay their investors their returns and have an operating property. Again, Dan brings up a great point, and I think it kind of combines with me, is that if that risk to me is just higher and higher and higher in that scenario. Class B, the nice part about Class B, and even maybe some Class C if it's in a lower income area, is it's available, right? It doesn't have to wait to be developed. It doesn't have to wait to be constructed, but it still needs to be renovated. Maybe you have to check to see what the renovation schedule is. Is 70% going to be heavy renovation, 20% medium, and 10% light? Well, that 70% may take a year without really any cash flow coming into like year 2 or year 3. And that might be okay, because when it gets to that point, it's going to be throwing off great cash flow. And if the returns are structured well, which we'll get to in later session, then, you're going to have all kinds of catch ups and prefs and stuff that you can, take advantage of. But I think that it's got to meet your risk tolerance, your criteria of what you want in. A lot of people are just multifamily. A lot of people are just storage, and they have their reasons. But when you're getting into the location, you have to see what's driving the price points. You have to see what's driving the ability to get those rents. You want to see low vacancies, high occupancies, high job markets, people that can afford the rents that are currently on the market. Because if people can't afford the current rents, what the heck's going to happen when the rents go up with these developers that are raising these rents to these higher numbers? They're not going to get people in there. One other example I'll give is Bethesda, Maryland has a huge luxury high-end seller group now that's getting out of these properties. They have these big monster homes, and they're selling, and they got this ton of equity, and they want to be in the city, and they want to rent a high-end Class A apartment. Well, that's a segment of demographic that can support that higher end rent, that Class A rent. So that's, again, when you do your due diligence, you can see that, holy crap, you know, like 70% of the people that are selling their high-end homes, getting equity, and they're getting these high-end apartments because they could afford it, you know, of getting back $1 million to $2 million of equity, they can afford a $5,000 a month rent. So that's, you know, just how part of your research. But given what's going on macro level, Dan's right. Macro level is a lot more darkness ahead of us right now before we see some light. You know, that makes it harder to get those higher end rents. Now, I would also argue that if you specifically focus on certain markets that are recession resilient or can weather the storm, then they'll still do very well. So how do you try to get that to work? Well, you want to make sure that the developers are getting in or the sponsors are getting in at a lower price point. You want to make sure that they're getting good deals on their construction costs, you know, stuff like that can balance out that risk and still get you a nice return. So really good stuff. I just want to show you too some of the reports that I like to look at when I'm looking at actual markets. If I can get out of this, there we go. And these are, again, reports you can pull up online. But, you know, you got Yardi Matrix, YARDI Matrix, all one word, is a really, really good market research tool that you can use that'll actually pull reports for you, multifamily, industrial, storage. You can see all the different types of reports they have here, multifamily, student housing. Some of them are paid subscriptions. Others give you like, you know, 1 or 2 for free, and then you got to sign up. But this is a really good one. I use this a lot when I put my pitch decks together and I want to study, you know, year over year market rate rents and growths and vacancies and what's the hot spots, why, what's the, you know, this gives you a lot of really good information. Another good one, obviously, is CBRE. They have a great one. It's just CBRE.com. I'm actually signed up and I get CBRE's quarterly newsletter. So like, you know, I get this really cool report from CBRE that gives me a rundown on the capital markets. So again, you know, I go in and I'm reading about, you know, what debt's at right now, you know, what's the vacancy rates doing, what's the supply chain issues. This was actually a pretty good report considering the crap we've been in the last 3 months. These guys seem to have a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, which is good. And they're starting to see interest rates starting to kind of come down a bit, possibly as early as the end of the year, which is great. But this is something you could sign up for as well that you can get from CBRE. And then the last one I usually like to go to is Cushman and Wakefield. These are the big boys. You know, you can also go to Jones Lang LaSalle, JLL. Cushman and Wakefield is another great one. They'll give you good reports. And again, these are when you're getting into the market areas and looking at specifics for multifamily, student housing, storage. Then you can pull up these reports and you can also sign up for their newsletters. And there's so many others that, you know, you got to just be cognizant that a lot of stuff out there, but you could definitely compare and use this stuff to your benefit when you're doing your research. So just want to make sure you guys had a chance to take a look at that. Hopefully it's helpful. We've gone through the market news. And again, there's so many good things out there. A lot of times I'll just go on to Google and I'll just type in, you know, Washington, D.C., first quarter 2023 real estate and hit news. And it'll just list all the different things that are out there reporting on real estate in that market. And that's also helpful as well. And again, you know, this is really when we're getting down into the returns and how do I get my money back and what are some of the things that I want to make sure that I'm comfortable with. You know, a lot of times you'll hear people say stress test and break even analysis. That's important. You should be able to ask your sponsor, you know, hey, what's going to have to happen to the market? Like when the market breaks at 20 or 30% below what you're underwriting, am I still getting my money back? And you want to see that analysis. We put that together on our deals. The sponsors do that for us. You know, what's my break even? And sometimes it's like for multifamily, it's a couple of variables. It's vacancy, occupancy, rent rate, you know, all of those variables mixed in. So you can have a scenario that's a hybrid that shows break even as well. So something very important to look at. And then, yeah, what's my exit primary? And then what's my, you know, door number 2, 3, and 4 exit if number 1 opens and there's COVID for the next 3 years, right? So that's something you want to make sure you understand. And then like Doug brought up, which is a great point, you know, if it's a risky project, then my returns should be reflective of the risky project and those returns should be higher. So if you're telling me we're going to be out in the rural part of the country, low population, but still strong segment of buyer or renter, or it's development, and we've got to go through zoning, I want to see some really good returns as well as the protection of my money. So I know that the risk is worth the return. And then the time, most deals are 3 to 5 years, some are 10 years. So, if it's a 10-year deal, that's fine. But, maybe asking the sponsor, is there an opportunity for a refinance? How much of my money am I going to get back in my investment? How much money is going to be available to give out for distributions? 5 years, maybe your limit. You may say, I'm going to only go in for 5 years because I want to have my money back and I want to be able to do another one of these. So the other thing I didn't have on here, and we talked about it previously, is just tax treatment. When you get into multifamily or you get into an asset, and we're talking asset class a little bit, even in location, you want to understand the tax codes in those locations, because you could be investing in a South Carolina LLC in a Georgia project. You want to make sure you understand, hey, do I pay South Carolina taxes because of the LLC? Do I pay Georgia taxes because we're investing in Georgia? Or do we pay Virginia taxes because I live in Virginia? So that's something you want to make sure you clearly understand when you're investing. Income from rent, each year you get a distribution, or quarterly you get a distribution, you're going to pay income, right? And if that's profits. And then anything over a year, if you start getting profit outside of rental income, that's considered long-term capital gains. So that's something you want to understand. And then obviously depreciation. How does that work? Depreciation's nice on the front end, but Uncle Sam's going to want to get his share at the back end. So if he gives you a hookup on the front, he's going to want that hookup on the back. So that's something to look at as well. Those are big things at this point. We're happy to stay on, answer any questions, definitely talk some more. This is great. I actually like to have a smaller group because we can kind of have a little more intimacy and hands-on. But on our next section or part, we're going to talk about the different types of projects and the asset classes. So that'll be exciting, because now we're going to talk about, what's the advantage of doing a student housing project versus a multifamily project. And again, that it's really your desire. And a lot of that has to do with location. Are you around, 5 universities in North Carolina where student housing would be a great thing? Or are you going to be at, down in Florida where there's no universities within 100 miles, but this developer wants to do student housing? So with that, I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to you guys if you have any questions, or if you want to chat some more. Going once, going twice.
No, I'm good with the questions for now.
Cool.
I had my big hit of a question there that's been kind of helping, actually creating a stumbling block for me for my research. So I appreciate that.
Sure.
All the insight was very, very helpful. So trying to make my notes as I go along and reflect on those.
Sounds good. Dan, anything that you wanted to mention or we missed?
Just one other thing that Kay asked, which was basically she was looking at mixed use and seeing if that was a bad sign. And me, it's a sign of population density. That's what I notice. It's like once you got the density, then you're going to have a lot of mixed use. It's, well, the term, if you haven't heard it, it's highest and best use. So the idea is that, like a parking lot might be the highest and best use for a property for now, but like down the road, as it gets more popular, it might make sense to put a skyscraper on it. But, often you can get way higher rents from some retail on the ground floor than you could if you just wanted to have, a straight out apartment complex. So it's definitely not a bad sign, but, I don't think any details of a building are indicative that it's going to make money. It's, like you have to see how the pieces of the puzzle combine for that area. So
yeah, that's a great point. I mean, again, being right outside of DC, our biggest tenant is the federal government. The problem is the last 3 years, the federal government has not been going into the office. So that's totally crushed the commercial office, and it's hurt significantly, although it's making a nice comeback, the commercial retail, because, the biggest tenant being the government, they got space, the the GSAs, government service agencies, or the actual broker end of the federal government that's actually going out and getting space. So, like you had mentioned, Kay, there's hotels that are converting to multifamily. The same thing here. We've got commercial office that's converting to multifamily because there's still a high demand and need for multifamily and housing, but there's not the largest tenant on the block coming into work every day now. So it's it's a challenge. It really is.
Mhm.
Something to consider.
Yeah, and hiring a driver and having some sort of shuttle is usually how I've seen, hotels and different buildings handle being in the middle of nowhere. If you can once a day, twice a day, something like that, hop on the bus and head to the nearest civilization, that sometimes works.
Yeah, I agree. So that's pretty much it. Location is very important. And I think bringing up those topics and subtopics are key. And there's a lot of great information out there that you could pull up and help, educate yourself and build a nice portfolio of data to back it up. One of the things I did say is, you could always call down to some of the properties down there. If you're getting into multifamily and you give a call or you make a visit down to some of those locations, you can actually go into the property management office and, strike up a conversation with them. Say, hey, I'm just looking in the area. It's beautiful. How have you guys done the last couple of months or the last 2 years or so on rents? Are you seeing any improvements? Most of them are pretty open about it. Some of them will just tell you, oh, we don't have that information, which is crap. But most of them are pretty nice and they'll talk to you.
Good to know. Yeah, I've actually just recently looked at it's a town called Bellingham. It's right below the Canadian border on the western side, and it's where Western Washington University is. And yeah, that was my college. And it's amazing. It used to be a lot of retirees, but because of the economics there, they've come more down to the Seattle area because UW's here. Medical facilities. We have a heavy senior living, senior population. We have more of the college population up in Bellingham for the college. So they've taken the senior livings that are now being more vacant and transferring those into college dorm rooms, college living, which kind of makes sense because they have more facilities for, instead of one big floor of kids that are 50 kids sharing one bathroom, you've got maybe 2 and 3 in one room sharing a bathroom. So they're charging more rents, and parents like that because it's more convenient for them. Things have changing, things are evolving, and it's impressive to see the different changes because just in my own backyard.
Yep. Agree. Well, cool. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.